I want to share for a few moments this evening something about the message of Christmas. I don't know what Christmas is looking like for you at the moment. Some of you who are studying here are about to prepare to go home. Other people, you're based in the city, and I don't know whether you've done your Christmas shopping yet, but I've been thinking over Christmas this year, and really for me, I've got quite reflective, and I've been thinking back over the year and beginning also to look into 2019. And I think for me, looking back over this year, if I could whittle this year down into a few words, it would be something along the lines of communication, of relationships, of people trying to do life together, but sometimes misfiring in doing that life. On the macro level, we've had the ongoing Brexit negotiations, us trying to work out what our relationship is like with the European Union. We've had Donald Trump, who seems to elicit great dislike and likes, seemingly in equal measures. We had the royal wedding with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, watched and viewed and shared by millions of people around the world. That connection of marriage, the most intimate of human relationships. And then we've had the continuing rise of social media. Did you know that 60 billion messages now are sent between people every single day on Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp? 3 billion snaps are sent on Snapchat. Anyone under the age of about 30, is that the right language? Is it a snap? Is it a snap? 2.7 billion people have Facebook profiles, and 270 million of those profiles are fake accounts. 95 million photographs will be uploaded to Instagram every single day. We've never lived in a time that has been both more connected and yet paradoxically more disconnected. People struggling with so many different pressures, people not seeming to be able to do relationship really well with one another. The rise of mental health, so much so that even in our student nights here at St. Matt's this term, the subject of mental health seemed to bubble up, and they've been on a journey together looking at how do we understand mental health, and so much of it boils down to relationships with each other. Self-harm, Tammy so beautifully and courageously sharing about her own struggles with self-harm. I was amazed to read that the rise in self-harm amongst teenage girls between 13 and 16 has increased by 68% in the last 3 years. All of us long for relationship. In fact, you and me were created for relationship. And yet so often we seem to misfire in those relationships, misunderstand each other, and see relationships breaking down or presenting ourselves and it isn't really ourselves, so we never really connect with someone on a really relational message. I was intrigued to read that the first ever text message that was ever sent was the words, "Merry Christmas." Inadvertently, the man who sent that text had struck something that is at the heart of all successful relationships. Christmas. God coming in human form to begin to help us to connect back again with Him and begin to connect properly with each other, to do relationships well, coming in person. I heard about a lady who was undergoing incredible mental anguish, insecurity, inadequacies, self-doubt. So much so that she left her family because she felt that she was doing such an appalling job and left them and thought they'd be better off without her. The husband started calling and texting, trying to get in touch with her, but to no avail. She didn't make any contact for several days, and he started calling the police that his wife was missing, until finally she responded to one of his text messages, and they started conversing via text. And he was saying, "I love you, whatever you're going through, we can work through this together. We're a family, we're for you. Whatever's happening, we can do this, we can relate well." And she was texting, "No, I'm so sorry, I'm not coming home, I'm not worthy, I shouldn't be with you, I can't do it, I can't cope." Finally, in one of her texts, he got a private detective to try and discover where she was, and they managed to pinpoint her location, and the man took himself and his children, bundled them in the car, and headed towards this location. They got to this house and knocked on the door. She opened the door and saw her family there, and she broke down in tears and started hugging them and weeping them. And the husband said, will you come home with us now? And she said, "I'd love to come home with you." And he said, "One thing I don't quite understand is why you didn't respond when I was calling you and when I was texting you to say that I love you." And she said, "It's because you finally came in person. God didn't send us a text or a snap or put a picture on Instagram. He came in human form, came in the flesh, came in the person. When the angel appeared to Joseph, he said that you're to give him the name, this new little boy that's going to come into the mess and muddle of your own family life and into the mess and the muddle of this world. You're to give him the name Jesus because he'll save people from their sins. And sin really just represents just the mess and the muddle and the miscommunication and broken communication and broken relationships that we all face in our lives to varying degrees. To begin to restore a relationship with a loving Heavenly Father and begin to enable us and empower us to begin to have true relationships with each other. Being real, like Tammy expressed up here, free to be confident in who we are because of our relationship with the God of love. Someone once said that if our greatest need in life had been for information, God would have sent us an educator. If our greatest need had been for technology, he would have sent a scientist. If our greatest need had been for money, he would have sent an economist. If our greatest need had been for pleasure, he would have sent us an entertainer. But our greatest need was for help and forgiveness. So he sent a savior, Jesus. Because of course that baby didn't stay a baby, but he grew up and became a man, fully at peace with who he was in relationship with God, so he could be at peace with other people. Not needing to put them down or put himself up, but just free to be who he was in relationship with his Father. And then finally, when the world didn't like that or couldn't handle dealing with someone of such purity and such love and such grace, he was pleased to go to a cross, to die for you and me, to break that power of disconnection between humankind and God, and to finally break that power of disconnection between each other, to restore us in right relationship with him, to give us a hope, to give us a future, to give us access to a power and a person and a presence that can then begin to help us to do proper relationship, proper life with each other. But of course, the amazing thing about Christmas, the amazing thing about Jesus, he doesn't just cleanse us from the past. He doesn't just begin to save us and help us in our lives, but he sees immense potential and purpose in you and me. He didn't save us just so that we can be sort of cleansed and forgiven. He saved us for a purpose. He sees immense value in you and me. Whether we feel valued in ourselves, he feels value in us. Recently, I've been chatting with a couple of friends in their marriages, and if you're married here tonight, it can be challenging, it can be difficult as we learn to do relationship, probably the most intimate of all relationships, well with each other, to encourage each other. And I once heard a story about a man living on an island out in the Pacific Ocean, and on that island, the way they did marriage and the way they did relationships is husbands would have to pay for their wives. You could get yourself a sort of a mediocre wife for about 3 cows. You could get a really good wife for about 5 cows. But there was one man there who paid the unheard of price of 8 cows for his wife. He became the laughing stock of the island because his wife, by all accounts, wasn't necessarily the most amazing of women. And yet he paid 8 cows for this wife. A journalist who heard of the story wanted to find this man and interview him because he had become the laughing stock of the island. And he was now living on a different island with his wife. When he knocked on the door was opened by this incredibly beautiful and elegant and dignified woman. A woman of great nobility who was standing there, dignified and confident in who she was. She ushered him through into the room where the man was. And as they started the conversation, he said, I don't want to be rude or anything, but I'd heard about this story that you'd paid the unheard of price of 8 cows for your wife and you're the laughing stock of the other island. And the man said, why do you think she wasn't worth 8 cows? And the man said, well, I've never met her. And he said, well, that was the woman who opened the door to you. That is my wife. And the man said, well, absolutely, she's worth way more than 8 cows. She's the most dignified, beautiful, elegant woman, noble woman I've ever met in my life before. And he said, exactly. He said, how do you think a woman would feel if she was only bought for 3 cows? And yet my wife, I loved her so much, I wanted her when she was in the market square to be saying how much her husband had paid for her, 8 cows. And I can tell you that when you know that you've been bought for 8 cows, you begin to turn into an 8-cow wife. The amazing thing about the Christmas message, the amazing thing about Christianity, is God didn't pay 3 cows or 5 cows or 8 cows for you and me. He gave everything. He came in the person of his son Jesus to die for you and me. The immense value that he sees in you and me, the immense purpose he sees in us to give everything for us, not just to cleanse us from the past, but to begin to help us to become all we could be in him. Immense potential. Whether you believe in yourself or not this evening, God believes in you so much that he gave everything for you. And when you and me begin to enter into that cleansing and that forgiveness, that fresh start, that new beginning, and begin to start to dare to believe his view of us, his belief in us, suddenly we begin to stand tall and elegant and confident and dignified in stature, and begin to run the race that he's laid out for us with great perseverance and great joy, with head held high like Tammy had before. And then we begin to believe in other people, begin to dare to treat other people like they're an 8-cow wife or an 8-cow husband or an 8-cow colleague or an 8-cow housemate. Because God has given everything for you and me, because he believed in us and he believes in you. And he calls us to be people who are going to believe the best in other people, to bring out the best in them. What's so interesting is that around Jesus, around the Christmas story, were some pretty ordinary, unlikely characters. But as soon as they got in proximity of Jesus, they started to take on an incredible purpose and potential. Mary, just an ordinary teenage girl, suddenly becomes someone who the rest of the world is going to talk about until Jesus returns again. Joseph, just an ordinary everyday lad, and yet this evening, 2,000 years later, we're speaking about his faithfulness to take Mary as his husband and look after her and care for her. Some ordinary average shepherds out on a hillside, again, we're talking about them 2,000 years later. Another young man who Jesus, when he grew up, came to hang out with, a guy called Simon, was then renamed Peter, Petrus, the rock, who went on to lead the church, and we're standing in his stead 2,000 years later. And a Samaritan woman who had 5 husbands, and the guy she was currently with wasn't her husband. Relationship after relationship, abuse after abuse. She finally met the one guy who bestowed dignity upon her, who didn't see her as an object, but saw her as someone of potential and value, believed in her, and she became one of the first missionaries the church has ever known. And we're reading about her 2,000 years later. And Jesus Christ is the same, yesterday, today, and forever. He's here amongst us this evening. We can't see him, but his Spirit is hovering over each one of us. He wants to cleanse you from the past, and he sees immense value and potential in you to help you to become all that you could ever possibly become in him. A life of fullness, an abundant life. God saves us, he believes in us, and he empowers us to believe in him and in other people. And in a moment, I'll help each one of us to experience that either for the first time or afresh, so that this Christmas time might be a Christmas like you've never experienced before.